Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. Hello.
Hi, Rabbi. How are you?
Good. Anything new?
Anything new? No.
I think Phyllis and Ronnie are here.
Well, Phyllis is here. I don't see Ronnie.
Phyllis. Yeah. It says Phyllis and Ronnie, but we only see Phyllis. Hey,
Well, you
Phyllis.
see Mary here?
No, us shrinky dinks are too little to see.
Well, I just thought maybe she was there, and she's not there, huh?
Well, she'll be here in a second.
Yeah. Well, let me admit everybody who's got to pay attention.
Mike, how'd you do with your chest thing?
Heart monitor. I haven't got the results yet, but it's still ticking.
Good.
It's still working. That's good.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. We got Kelly and Ginny, some of our class.
Oh, did I tell you that I ordered those DVDs of the interview?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
They say you have to be a family member, but I just it's my cousin's mother, so I just said it's my cousin.
There you go. There you go.
She was more like an aunt to me, but there was a lady at the Shiva the other night was talking about Dina, my friend. She was saying that they lived in the camps for like 3 years before they left.
In the actual camp?
That's what they said.
Well, it is true. Some of the concentration camps, not really, I don't think they were death camps, but some of the
Displaced
labor
persons.
camps, some of the labor camps were turned into DP camps.
Yeah, that's what they call it. They moved her to a DP camp. Yeah.
No, they definitely
They said.
did that.
And then they moved to Israel.
Yep, my cousins too. They came here in 1951, I think. From Israel.
My friends came, I want to say in the late 50s. My mom taught them English.
Can you imagine though? I mean, living in a camp for years and years, and then still living in a camp for years.
I know. It's that when she was telling that story, it was just mind-boggling.
Well, I met a survivor recently. Actually, unfortunately, he passed away. He lived in Friendly Valley. He ended up marrying. He stayed in Germany just after the war and helped, like the Allied.
Oh wow!
It was just U.S., but Allied people there. And he actually ended up marrying a German woman. He wasn't. He was originally from Poland. He was brought to camp, and he ended up marrying a German Christian woman, a German Christian woman who converted to Judaism. And they started a family and live in America. I mean, ended up moving to America, but he moved out of the DP camps, and it was like but he still lived in Germany, which I found to be also kind of strange that somebody wouldn't get the hell out of Germany.
Oh, absolutely. My friend Dina and her husband Mickey, the first thing they did, like I said, is they moved to Israel.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So we're still waiting for a few people to come in. I know we've got our B'nai Mitzvah, some of our B'nai Mitzvah folks, which is really cool. They were with me last night on our call. We did a class online, which was really cool. But
yeah, that was nice.
it was good to see everybody. Yeah, we're really working hard on trying to get people together in person. So we know that people are chomping at the bit to be able to come out and be part of real community for a change. So I was over at the synagogue today, and yeah, it was really strange, to think about. The last thing we did in that room was basically Purim. So weird.
Yeah.
So weird. But the synagogue looks good. It's definitely missing the sound of people in it, but it is okay. It's functional.
You have to do one of those deep cleaning things that they're recommending.
I don't know. It's been pretty empty for 2 months, so I don't know. I mean, it's literally like not even.
Virus would still.
I don't know how any virus would have been able to stay alive there. It literally hasn't been pretty much mothballed, but no, it looks nice. I mean, we're looking at doing some work in the next couple of weeks while we're still not in there to try to make it look even better. So we're hopefully going to redo the women's bathroom, and the new carpeting looks good, and everything, everything's moving forward. It's sad though that nobody's inside it. It's the same thing that's happening at every synagogue around the country. Is there these buildings?
Okay.
Built.
What hat do you have on, Rabbi? There you go.
Don't worry, Mike.
I approve.
We'll make sure that keep a Dodger fan as much as possible.
It's when you wear that Yankee hat is when I leave.
I'll never wear a Yankee hat. You can. If I wear a Yankee hat,
Or a giant hat.
I've lost it. Then I've really lost it. Yeah. No, even if my daughter married somebody on the Giants, I wouldn't be wearing a hat. It could be owner of the Giants, I wouldn't wear a hat. I promise you. So here we go. Well, I don't know. A few other people said they were going to be here tonight, but we're going to get going. We've got a great portion. Somebody's got me on. Hold it a second. I gotta mute everybody for a second because somebody's got it turned up really loud. So we're gonna start, and I'm going to share this on Facebook right now. We're going on Facebook, and we're gonna get going. And I'll watch for people coming on. Hold it one second. Make sure that people get to see this live. You know what I didn't do? I've been doing a little reminders for people on Facebook that we're going live, but I didn't do that tonight. There we go. One second. We'll be streaming in just a moment up on Facebook. This is an interesting portion. We're going to revisit some of the ideas that we talked about last time, including some of the sexual laws, specifically, some stuff about homosexuality. We have the second line, I would say another line. We have the only other line about homosexuality in the Bible and that we'll be looking at. Hold it a second, everybody. I don't know that we're up yet. I'm admitting other people, doing everything here. Hold it. No. Can you hear me still? Yeah. All right. It's preparing it, so we're not officially live yet, but we will be in a second. And I'll try to. And that gave me a few minutes to get our minion together. Now we have a minion. Well, we actually have more than a minion because there's some people that have more than one person in the household, but it's good to have a minion together, at least by computer, a minion of computers. So, all right, it's still preparing, so I apologize. I'll try not to let that distract me. but we do like to make sure we give people the ability to join in on Facebook if they just want to watch for a little bit. So let's take a look at Kedoshim. Is Ronnie going to be joining us tonight?
Ronnie will come up. Yeah.
He's going to come up. All right, good.
He's
Because
watching the news.
I want to hear everybody's take tonight on this portion, especially given that it does touch on this issue of homosexuality again, and it is problematic for people. We live in a world today where people, we have a whole different take just in the last 15, 20 years on homosexuality. And so when we read this, even in my own lifetime, it's been, we've had such a different change on the way we read this and the way we understand it. I mean, it's almost amazing to think about how much we've changed in the last 30, 40 years when we read this portion. Before we get into this, I just want to let everybody know that I saw on Netflix this week a really interesting documentary that a lot of people, it's not Tiger King level of Netflix, but it's gotten a lot of discussion. It's called Circus of Books. Has anybody seen it? Circus of Books? Anybody? Hello?
No, but I've heard a lot about it, and it's on my list.
It's a really interesting documentary, and it really is, it focuses on one family in particular, one family that's in the midst of kind of the gay community in West Hollywood. And it's very, very Jewish. It has a large portion about it is about a mother and her son, and the Jewish religious component of it, because they're conservative. It's a conservative Jewish family, conservative Judaism, a family that is very involved in their synagogue and in Jewish life. And so that is a big part of the documentary. It's the person who told me about it to watch it wasn't Jewish and said, "You got to watch this. This has got a lot of Jewish. It's got a lot about Judaism in it." And I don't think it wasn't as Jewish as some documentaries. It was not only about Jew, but I didn't even know about it. And it turned out to have a pretty interesting Jewish component. So I do recommend it for everybody. And I think it's pretty good. It's definitely worth watching. It touches on some interesting ideas. So it is relevant to this week's Torah portion, because this week's Torah portion, Kedoshim, has a very famous line about human sexuality. But before we get to that, let me open up and start sharing the still says it's preparing, so I'm having some. We may not be able to be on Facebook tonight, so that's too bad, I guess. I mean, try it. Usually it's worked, but it doesn't look like it's working tonight. Sharing it. Sorry, Facebook people. Well, you're not going to hear this anyways because you're not seeing me on Facebook. So we're going to take a look. So this portion is read, as Mike Schwartz pointed out, is usually read as part of and I say usually, oftentimes, most years, like this year, next year, 2 years from now, is going to be read with Achrei Mot as a dual portion. And it is because it continues this theme of human sexuality and what we call the Holiness Code. But here, articulated in this portion, and it's also, importantly, it's also on the shorter side. So it is a because it's a shorter portion. It obviously it lends itself to the doubled up portions that we oftentimes have. So so today we're going to be reading from chapters 19 and 20, and so when we read this with the previous portion, 16, 17, 18, it's a long portion when it's doubled up, but it's definitely readable. And But I also think that Kedoshim really does require a good focus on its own. So last portion began with the death of Aaron's sons, kind of the cleansing and what we would call the Yom Kippur rituals, which are in chapter 16 and 17. And then as we go into chapter 18, we get into the sexual, prohibited sexual unions. It really isn't about what you can do. It's about what you can't do. And so this is going to continue a little bit in that theme in chapter 19 and 20. But it begins with this very famous phrase of the Torah, which is found in the second line of the Torah, and it's a repeated phrase in Kedoshim and in Leviticus. So it begins with Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe le'emor, God spoke to Moses saying, and then it says, speak to the whole community, the whole Edah, the whole community, Bnei Israel, and say to them, Valmartem alehem Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani. So those 4 words, or 5 words, when not hyphenated, ki Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani. You shall be holy, for I am holy. And those or Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. Excuse me. Those words together are sometimes even emblazoned on synagogues. I've seen them in synagogues in America and Europe. Kedoshim to you, sometimes just Kedoshim to you shall be holy, but oftentimes with Ki Kadosh, and then Ki Kadosh Ani Adonai Elohechem, I am because I am holy, and then again sometimes with An Adonai Elohechem, your God, the Lord your God. But this concept of us being holy, that we're holy as a community, as a group, as a people, is important first because we're holy. Not just the priests are holy, but every Israelite is holy, because it says right at the beginning, the whole Israelite community, not just the men, everybody, and not just priests, obviously. Everybody is holy. So that's an important concept, that everybody's holy. But there's another concept here too, which is that we're holy because God is holy. And so we're set apart, we're made holy as a reflection of God in this world. And so just as God is unique, the Jewish people are unique. There's a lot of ways that this has kind of been interpreted, reflected on, meditated on. But this phrase, be holy because God is holy, is one that really resonates throughout time for us. And it is something that we kind of understand, that we're imitatio Dei, to use another Latin phrase, that we're imitating God. We're being like God by being holy. And this is why we call this section Kedoshim. It comes from the word right here, which is actually, as you can see, about over 10 words into the Torah portion, we finally get to the word Kedoshim. But this word holy, or holy ones, that's what really it means, holy ones, holy plural, holy people plural, that this is the concept that we're kind of like, this is the emanating and invigorating and animating principle of this whole portion, and to some extent the whole Torah. So let's take a look at what we actually get into now, which are we call this the Holiness Code, which, by the way, implies that there is a code here, that this is a code. It's not just a bunch of laws, but there actually is a concept here that even if these laws weren't originally written together, they were assembled together, and it's a mini law book, if you will. It's not long, but it is on its face, the readers of the Bible who look for kind of authorship issues, and they look for how is the Bible constructed, they see this code as a standalone document, which again maybe existed outside of the Bible, outside of the Torah, and then was incorporated into the Torah. So keep that in mind as we read this, that this is one of the codes. The most famous code, of course, is the 10 Commandments, but even that is part of a wider code, a bigger code that we call the Covenant Code. And there's another code that's going to be later on in the book of Deuteronomy called the Deuteronomic Code, which maybe is the last code. The Deuteronomic Code is code that you find in Deuteronomy, which again seems to be another freestanding code, if you will. So here's the code. Here's how it begins. And it's going to sound a little bit like the Ten Commandments. You know, there is overlap, but it is different. But here's one that sounds remarkably like the Ten Commandments. Or a couple. Ishimo, you shall revere his, it's kind of a bad English translation, but you shall revere your mother and father, or he shall revere his mother and father, and keep my Shabbat. I, the Lord, am your God. Ani Adonai Elohechem. So here we have two laws: the laws of honoring your parents and also keeping Shabbat. And they're joined together. They're one. That's one verse. I mean, you see it. It's one verse. So, what's different about this line than the line we read in Exodus a few weeks ago? Anybody want to chime in? Anybody want to say why this is different from Exodus chapter 20? Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha. Well, one reason is that it's a different word, right? Wait, somebody's, yes. So Francine is saying they are not together in the Torah. You're absolutely right. In the Torah, it's actually reversed. I mean, it doesn't even matter. It's reversed. It's not together. The commandment to keep Shabbat is commandment 4, the way we normally order them. And the commandment to honor our parents is commandment 5. So yes, it is not, it's reversed and it's not together is one sentence. But yeah, that's one thing that's pretty clear. But it's actually, there's a couple things that stick out about this. Well, first, we lead with that's the first thing we have in the Holiness Code. It's kind of interesting. But it begins with, and it's only 4 words. Ishimo ve'aviv tira'u. So it's a different word. Yirah is a different word than kabed. Kabed means to honor. Yirah means to revere or to fear. So we oftentimes use the word revere nowadays, but it oftentimes the King James is to fear. If you look it up, it's going to say, you shall fear your mother and your father. So that's one difference. The verb that's used is different. One is reverence or fear, and the other one is honor. But it's also reversed. Mother comes before father. In the 10 Commandments, it's honor your father and your mother. So the rabbis, of course, asked the question, why do we have a reversal of the order here? Does anybody want to guess? Anybody want to throw out an answer? You're on mute, so you have to unmute if you want to throw out a guess. Why do we have it in a different way? Yeah. Anybody? No? All right. Well, I'll give you one answer. Not my answer. One of the traditional answers. One of the answers is that it's reversed to give balance to the two, so that if you put it the same way both times, you wouldn't have that balance of father and mother being respected or honored or feared. That's one possibility. The other possibility is it actually is intentionally reversed and placed in this way because of the way it is in the 10 Commandments. Because what happens, and again, this is a 2,000-year-old answer. It's not something that somebody made up recently. And maybe it's not relevant anymore anyways. I don't know. But here's the answer that was given. The reason why it says here to revere your mother and your father is because the rabbis point out 2,000 years ago that it's the reverse of the way you normally would have it. The way that it's given in both places is to compensate for the way human behavior normally is. And maybe, again, they're talking about the way it normally was 2,000 years ago. Maybe not. But their answer was, we're more likely to fear our father than our mother. And so the Torah commands it in reverse here to say the mother first so that you don't stop fearing your mother. Now, again, there's some of us who feared our mothers more than we feared our fathers, but the Torah's, the rabbi's interpretation is that all things being equal, you're more likely to fear your dad normally. And so you should fear your mom too. And the Torah tells us in that order so that you fear them equally and that you fear both. And that, again, honoring, you maybe would be more likely to honor your mother, but you should honor your father, and you should honor your father too. So whatever honor that you give your mom, you should also give it to your dad too. So this is maybe the reason why the words are different and why they're reversed and why the order of the parents are reversed. Not just that the verbs are different, but that the words are reversed. That's a possibility. Something to think about as we go into Mother's Day. But I don't know. So for everybody to reflect, to think about that, there are two different versions of it in the Torah. That is important to know, that one is in honor and one is to fear or revere. Okay? Then we get into the next commandment. Anybody else want to say anything about the mother or father or Shabbat? Okay. So then let's look at the next one, which is do not make idols or molten gods for yourselves. I, the Lord, am your God. Well, that seems pretty straightforward. Not to be idolatrous, not to make them, not to worship them. Then, when you sacrifice an offering of well-being, sacrifice it so that it may be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it, or on the day following. But what is left by the third day must be consumed in fire. If it should be eaten on the third day, it is an offensive thing. It will not be acceptable. And he who eats of it shall bear his guilt, for he has profaned what is sacred to the Lord. That person shall be cut off from his kin. So this law is specifically about sacrifices, and actually specifically about a certain kind of sacrifice. But I think you can see that there's something unusual here, which we don't have in Exodus, and we don't have later on in Deuteronomy, which is that there's a thing here about sacrifices that, like, this makes the holiness code, that this is important enough to be included in these big laws that people need to think about. It needs to be kind of at your top of your list, which again seems to indicate that this was written, that this holiness code in particular was written by priests, and specifically by priests who expected you to bring offerings and not to, and that this reflects like a later composition from people who are actually like cultic priests who worked in the temple and expected everybody to bring their sacrifices when they were supposed to. So this, again, the theory is that this is a later addition to, that this is a later addition to the Torah, and or later than the other versions of it that we have, and so of the other codes, and so this is why we have, this here. So it took up a lot of lines. I mean, there's a lot of pages, a lot of pages. It wasn't pages, but a lot of text, that was given over to this sacrifice issue. So very important, and again, probably a greater indicator that this was written by priests and enforced at a time when people were really thinking about what kind of sacrifices people were offering. All right. Next, any questions about that? So that was 4 verses, 4 or 5 verses. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 verses. Now, let's get into some interesting laws about the way we take care of people in particular. This is really, quite frankly, the ways that we take care of the most vulnerable in our community. Let's read it. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of the field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them from the poor, for the poor and the stranger. I, the Lord, am your God. Which again, we find over and over again that line, Ani Adonai Elohechem. Don't forget that this is God that's telling you this. This isn't your feel good about giving some charity. The Torah actually says this is the law. And so there's a couple things going on here. We call these the laws of Peah, the laws of the corners, and it's also the laws of Leket, which means gleanings. So sometimes, Peah, Peot, and Leket. And we know the word, the word Peot or Peas. Those are the corners of people's heads too. And they let their Peot grow, which some people say are reminders of the fact that we're supposed to keep the corners of our fields for the poor, that it's a way of reminding ourselves of that mitzvah of taking care of other people. But the Peot, the laws of Peot are primarily in the Torah not about your hair. They're about the corners of your field and the fact that this is one of the ways to protect the poor. The Torah doesn't say specifically how much that is supposed to be, right? So it doesn't say how much of your corners you have to leave. But later on in the rabbinic text, we get very strict definitions of how much you have to leave, because obviously people could take advantage of this and say, well, I'm going to leave a tiny little piece of the corner. And they didn't. And they even talk about, well, what if you don't have a field that has an easy corner to figure out? What if your field is a little bit like a circular dimension, and how do you figure out a corner there? So again, we start coming up with percentages. And again, this idea of tithing, of keeping a tenth of your produce for the poor and for the priests, these ideas come about because people are saying it's not just about area, it's also about the total product of what you're harvesting. And then, of course, it is also this idea of leket, of the gleanings, that you don't, when you drop something on the ground, that's now the poor. That's now the poor's. It's not yours to pick up. You can't pick it up. So you have to be careful. You don't want to be lazy about picking stuff. But there's this idea that maybe if people leave that behind, then the poor will be protected, that the poor can know that they can come through and pick this up. Now, obviously, this isn't like the best, but this is very much like, the companies and the organizations that work with food companies to bring, old food, out of a restaurant or out of a grocery store and get them to food pantries and get them to the people who it's not the best food. It's not necessarily, the freshest food, but obviously, people are getting it, and it allows people to be protected. And
The supermarkets also sell slightly damaged fruit at a much lower price.
Yeah. And then again, if nobody buys this stuff, it winds up going to food pantries. So we do have a pretty organized, we're not perfect, obviously, in our society, but we do have a lot of, we do a pretty good job in our country of getting food that is about to spoil to people who need it. And again, needless to say, right now, food pantries are being overwhelmed by people in need. So our society had a way of making sure that however many people there were, however many farmers there were, there's always going to be leket. There's always going to be gleanings. There's always going to be peot. So you can never say, well, we don't have, there's not enough food for them because there's not enough. If you've got food, you got stuff left over, and you're going to have poor people that need it. And so this is a protection. This is the safety net. Does anybody know where this story, this law becomes very obvious in the Bible? What's the story in the Bible? What?
in Ruth.
That's right, in the book of Ruth, which we're going to read in a few weeks. Shavuot. Read the story of Ruth and the fact that Ruth, when she comes back with Naomi, her job is to go through the field of Boaz and to pick up the gleanings, that this is going to be the way for her and her mother-in-law to survive, is to eat the remnants that were left behind. And of course, we hear that Boaz ends up, taking a liking to her and making sure that she can collect the food, without having any problems, which of course indicates that there were problems when people did this, that just because there was a safety net didn't mean it always operated smoothly and that there weren't problems with it. So it's a wonderful law. It was a wonderful protection in our laws to take care of the most vulnerable. And it's basically reminding us that we have to share what we have with others. It's, we continue to try to figure out how this can be applied and how it can be protected in our own day, how we can make sure that we do that. And it would kind of be like today if, we made money and every time, we picked up, the extra, whatever the extra change or whatever we had, we put it aside for the poor. Some people do that. I mean, some people have a tradition of having a pushka box, wherever they have change, they put it in, whenever they have change, they collect it and use that to donate. So we have modern ways of doing this. It's probably a fraction of a fraction compared to what our ancestors did, but we can find ways to make this real in our own day, and we're fulfilling the Torah by doing it. We're fulfilling the Torah mitzvah by doing it. In this code, these laws are up there with honoring your parents, keeping Shabbat. Here we have it. And it is other places in the Torah. This isn't the only place we read about the gleanings, but it is here in Leviticus. It'll be there again in Deuteronomy, in the Deuteronomic code, but it's here. So
Mark, I have a question,
yeah.
please.
Yeah.
So is there anything written about how we take care of the poor or how we give to the poor in such a way that those in need maintain their dignity? Is there anything discussed about that, or is that just meant to be common sense?
Well, I think there is both. There are laws that deal with maintaining the dignity of the poor. One of the implications of this law is that when the people come through to pick up the gleanings, first of all, so everybody, the farmers go through with their staff, pick up all the, harvest everything, and then the stuff that's left behind on the trees and on the wheat fields, wherever, that stuff had to get the poor. So assuming like everybody, all the crew is gone, okay, it's now, and they would probably like step off and say, okay, now it's the poor. And the poor would probably, in my mind, they probably ran through and tried to pick up whatever they could. That's my guess of it. My guess of like imagination of what happened. And people would figure out where the best places to go to do it. They'd say, hey, these guys are always pretty good at letting the corners and the gleanings go and let's be there. That's a good place to go. So my guess is that people knew even back then. But think about what's happening. The people are doing some of the work themselves. And they don't have fields. They're not farmers. They're not even workers on the farm. But yet they're doing a little bit of farming themselves. They're doing a little bit of the work themselves. And so they do get to have a little bit of dignity in that they've got to do it. They've got to do something. They've got to do something themselves, and they can come and get the food and do their own little harvest, their own little mini harvest, if you will. So they do get to do that. So that is preserving their dignity, if you think about it in a way, by having them do some farming, if you will. It also teaches us that the rabbis teach us later on in the Talmud that even a beggar, even a poor person who's doing this has to give money to the poor. So even the person that's collecting this stuff has to keep a little bit and give it to the people less fortunate than them. Now, it seems crazy because, of course, they're already poor. How does a poor person give charity? And the rabbis teach us that poor person has to give charity because they have dignity that comes with giving charity. And if they can give something to somebody else, then they'll have some dignity. So it is really important in Judaism to maintain people's dignity. We'll talk about that when we get to the sexual issues too. The sexual tech, whatever, talks about that kind of, or maybe it's implied. But yeah, dignity is really important. And it is this idea of making sure that people do it, not because they want to do it. They may not want to do it, but they don't have a choice. If somebody was not doing this, they could be fined or they could be punished for not giving their proper tithing. So this was a serious law. This wasn't just like, hey, if I want to, I can give 10%. I mean, nobody today enforces charity in our country. Nobody enforces it in the Jewish community anymore. There used to be, up until even a few generations ago, there were people who would go and ask people for money, knowing how much money that they had. I mean, people were definitely in other people's business a lot more than they are today. And they would know how a person's doing, and they would go to them and say, look, we know that you had a good year. We know that you're earning, we know you just made this deal. We know that your caravans just came in with all this money, with all this stuff for you. You need to give money this year because you have it. And that was completely acceptable and expected in the Jewish community. Today, we don't do that anymore. We definitely guilt people occasionally, but we don't even do that much anymore because nobody really has to feel like they have to give it to the Jewish community or to charity in general. So we've definitely changed when it's come to this. But you can read stories about it all throughout the shtetl life, where people literally would knock on people's doors and say, look, you have to give money. And some people didn't do it, and they were known as misers, and they were not held in good esteem if they held back their charity that was expected or assumed that they could give. So yeah, I mean, people would say, well, you don't know, I have other costs. I mean, I'm sure people had those discussions for generations, but people did. The expectation, though, was that they were going to give, and people knew whether they gave or not. It's not so much the case anymore. So we operate in a much different world when it comes to charity in the Jewish community today. Believe me,
We have much less left over for charity when you get through with city, state, and federal taxes.
Phyllis, there's no doubt. I mean, the reality is that there is a problem that we've noticed before, and there are different reasons that are given for it. But we do know that states that have higher tax rates generally have lower percentages of giving, and that's partly because, again, people feel like they've already given, they've already been taxed, and there is something to be said about that. I mean, a good chunk of our tax dollars do go to support social welfare programs. So I mean, you can make that argument that that's part of where our tax dollars go. But this is a challenge that again the Jewish community faces, and is probably going to get worse because, somebody pointed out too. I'm not going to say who because he's on the phone right now. He's on the call right now, but it made a very good point that when people go to church and they put in a collection plate, everybody knows who's giving, because you don't know everybody, but you know the people around you. You can see whether the person next to you put something in the collection plate. We don't know that. I mean, at the high holidays, we walk around and pick up envelopes, but that's the only time anybody ever knows whether somebody gave. And the reality is as we've talked about, if we do stuff online, no one's going to know whether somebody gave or not, unless which I don't think anybody's talking about doing, unless we lit up everybody's box when they gave, and we called out people who gave. I mean, which I don't want to do, but I don't know what churches are going to do when they don't have the social pressure of people next to them giving and seeing, you got to give, because people will know whether you gave or not. So I don't know. It is an interesting question. If we're giving more virtually this year, whether people will feel the same social pressure to give. But yeah, it used to be a big part of the Jewish community's collection of tzedakah was because everybody knew. You couldn't escape it. So again, keep that in mind. I mean, this is, as we've become less and less in each other's lives, and as we've gotten less connected in general as a society, this has already been happening. We just may have just jumped a whole nother level with social distancing. We may have just jumped a whole nother level of people not knowing who's giving and who's not. I mean, we can recognize the people who give, but it's a whole lot different than actually knowing that the person next to you just gave. So I don't know. I mean, look, it's never been an issue. We don't do that in the Jewish community, as I said, except at the high holidays.
Mark,
yeah.
But Chabad is based upon outreach and doing, correct? I mean, giving, doing in the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community, substance abuse, various programs, right? You're saying we're not doing it much in the Jewish community, but Chabad is based upon that. Am I correct?
I don't know. What do you mean? What did I say? I said we're not getting in people's business. I'm talking about when we ask for donations. I'm saying when we get into people's business, we're generally not in people's lives. I mean, every synagogue or every Jewish, here's the difference, by the way, House. You raise an interesting point. So Chabad does outreach through Chabad. The Jewish community that's not Chabad has generally over the years become, they've differentiated responsibilities. So for example, if Chabad does drug rehab, which they used to do more of, they don't do as much as they used to, unfortunately. We farmed it out to Beit Teshuvah, and the Jewish community, especially the non-Orthodox community. Chabad used to do a lot of drug outreach in California. I'm just going to tell you what happened. When they used to get a decent amount of aid from the state government. It wasn't really federal; it was state money. What happened is Chabad didn't have drug rehab support for women. And the state said, you can't do it for men and not do it for women. Now, Chabad had an argument, which is that we separate by sexes. But Chabad basically said, but the government said, but you're not doing anything for women. We're not going to fund you unless you have equal services for men and women. So they basically lost the state money. And so they don't have the substance abuse treatment that they used to have. Beit Teshuvah does. They don't have separate men and women. They don't separate men and women, and so they're able to continue. Beit Teshuvah gets a lot of money from grants and from the Jewish community. But Beit Teshuvah in maybe the old days, something like, well, we didn't have, by the way, unfortunately, drug rehab in the Jewish community until about 30 years ago. But if we had it 150 years ago. And again, it's not like we didn't have a problem. There's always been addiction. It's not like this just started. But before we had drug addiction clinics and those kind of things, the Jewish community wouldn't have had a Chabad or a Beit Teshuvah. The synagogue would have handled it. Again, don't think about drug rehab. Think about food services. The synagogue used to take care of people who didn't have food. Now we have Mazon, which does hunger outreach. We have Sova, a food bank, a Jewish food bank. The synagogue used to do that. There used to be the synagogues, like even today, if you go to Venice, you can see the synagogues maintain their own Jewish senior homes. Today we have Jewish homes for the aging. So we've differentiated and specialized in ways that we didn't used to do. The Jewish community used to take care of everything themselves. So Chabad does more of it in the sense that they follow kind of the more traditional model, and that they all call it Chabad. They don't call it Beit Teshuvah. They don't call it the Jewish homes for the aging. I mean, they don't do aging services, but if they did, I'm just talking about the concept. So it's a different concept. It's basically having everything under one umbrella versus, again, having separate organizations. We have Jewish free loans. every synagogue used to have essentially a fund for people if they needed money and they needed to borrow money. You didn't have to go to a separate organization for loans. So yeah, all those social service things we used to handle in-house within the Jewish community up until the last 50, 60 years, 70 years. Okay. So, so I hope that answers your
It did,
question.
Mark. Thanks. Yes.
So, so now let's get into some of the more ethical ways. So we talked about laws of priests. We talked about laws for the poor. Now we're going to get into some laws that have to do with the way you treat peers, if you will. You shall not steal. You shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. So the first part of that is lo tignavu, which is like lo tignov, don't steal, don't be a ganav, you know. But here it goes further. It says, do not deal deceitfully or falsely with each other. So this is even more descriptive than the way that Torah says it, which is just lo tignov, don't steal. Here it says, don't deal deceitfully or deal falsely with each other. So it's a little bit more explicit, and it's also includes other things that wouldn't just necessarily be downright theft, but definitely it's theft. When you're cheating somebody, you're stealing from them. If you're dealing with them and not telling people that, you know, you're giving them 2 pounds of flour, but you're really only giving them 1.5 pounds. Yeah, it's not, you didn't steal it from them, but you stole money from them by your deceit. So the Torah here is a little bit more explicit, and it encompasses some other types of behavior which are not just on the face of it theft. Shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord, which again is very similar to the law in the Torah, which is not to use God's name in vain or not to swear falsely. Again, here it's specifically swearing an oath. It's tishveu bishmi, with my name. It's not swearing an oath by your name. It's not saying, I promise by God I will do something. You don't do that. The Torah originally in Exodus, originally or elsewhere in Exodus, doesn't say swearing. It says to not take God's name in vain, or again, probably means more, again, using God's name for these kinds of oaths or using God's name inappropriately in a more broad term. Here, you shall not defraud your fellow, your neighbor or your fellow is the way it translates the word re'echa here. Don't commit robbery, which is different than necessarily theft, which could be burglary, right? Robbery is assumedly bold-faced, outright. I literally went up to the guy and stole his wallet, that kind of thing. It's doing it to the person, you know, while they can see it and while they're literally, you're attacking them or whatever, taking it from them. But this next part of this verse is not to hold the wages. The wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning, which is a really interesting law. You're not allowed to hold people's wages even a day. If you owe somebody money, now of course today we would say this clearly doesn't apply to the understanding that we have with somebody that we're going to pay them every 2 weeks. We tell them we're paying them every 2 weeks, and we pay them on a Friday, whatever, even if it's 2 weeks after they did the work, it's an understanding that this is the way we are able to pay somebody in a modern commercial system. But still, if you told somebody, I'm going to pay you for your work for 2 weeks, and then you hold it for an extra day without getting their okay, not giving them a warning, that is definitely a violation of Torah law. And it's put right with these other laws of the way we treat people and not robbing them and not defrauding them. So it's a very strict law, and anybody who's ever employed anybody before really has to consider the fact that the Torah says that if you owe somebody money for wages, you're not allowed to keep it from them. This is not a minor law. It's not like a suggestion. You're not allowed to hold on to their money. It's kind of considered to be theft. So This is a really powerful law in the Torah. The next law is pretty amazing in its, again, how advanced were our laws. You shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am the Lord. And those kind of that doubled up law, which again, again, we're finishing with, you shall fear your Lord. I am the Lord. This, again, this idea of these are ways that we're accountable to God for this. This double law of not insulting the deaf and not placing a stumbling block before the blind, we understand that this isn't just literally only blind and deaf people, but any person who has any type of disability at all. And furthermore, even if it's not necessarily a physical or mental challenge, that taking advantage of somebody and putting not even a physical barrier in front of them, but an emotional or a challenge in front of them that isn't fair and is taking advantage of a weakness, that's considered to be, again, going against the Torah. I mean, I think you can understand that this is really for us, this is really an interesting, and again, you could talk only about this concept of not placing a stumbling block and what it means for the way we treat people, because obviously it's not just these physical and obvious stumbling blocks we put before people.
They don't have a street address.
So
Can I say
anybody
something,
else?
Mark?
Yeah.
After
Please.
reactions. One, we're not supposed to set people up for failure. I mean, that's what it comes down to. The second thing is, all of these, I am your Lord, I am your God. What it does is it takes laws between human interactions, and it raises the ante that not only shouldn't you do this because it's wrong, but you have to do it because I told you not to do it. It puts them on the same level as the laws we don't understand, the ones that are not rational. You do this because I said so. You're a special people. You have a special relationship with God, and this is how you ought to behave because I'm telling you that's how you ought to behave.
Yeah, that you are absolutely right. That's what I said. It was like you're accountable to God. This is your accountability to God on this. This isn't just, again, you want to do it. I think you should do it. It'll be a nice thing. It'll be a better world if we do it. Judaism understands that these are laws that we're accountable to God for. And it's again, not because you want to do it, because it'll make you feel good, but because, again, you're violating God's expectation and desire and commandment for you by doing it. So it's really, really, it's a powerful law, which, I mean, we talk about why the Torah laws are relevant and why they still need to be studied, because we still have a problem living by this. I mean, we are constantly, as a world and as a society, as a country, we violate this so often, and it's almost, again, each one of us could point out 100 examples of how we are placing stumbling blocks before people. And again, I mean, it's just all around us on a daily basis, that we're witnesses to it. We're complicit in it, and it's really a problem because it's one of our mitzvot that is. It's no less of a mitzvah than all these other mitzvahs that people want to talk about, and it's. Look, it's a problem for synagogues. I mean, it's a to some extent, I'm not talking about the obvious things, which is, synagogues have to be ADA compliant and all those other things. I'm not talking, those are obvious, but I'm just talking about whether synagogues, by making people feel like they can't be members, or that there's a financial stigma if they don't pay due. I mean, how's that not a stumbling block? So there are ways that this is put into effect by the Jewish community as well. And this is, it's horrific, because it's Jewish institutions that are sometimes responsible for putting the stumbling blocks up. So yeah, it's again, it's not, for thousands of years, we've understood this is not just a literal stumbling block. You put a stumbling block in front of something that somebody would trip over. Anybody else? Because we're about to read another really relevant, hyper-relevant law that, again, we constantly violate. You shall not render an unfair decision. Do not favor the poor or show deference to the rich. Judge your kinsman fairly. Now, again, a lot of people would have assumed that it would just be not to show deference to the rich. But the Torah is actually saying here that there are situations where people might show preference to the poor, where they might actually be saying, hey, we're going to go out of our way to render a decision for the poor. That's not right. I think about how advanced that idea is too, because even in a culture, society that tries to take care of the poor, we realize that we can overcompensate, that we can sometimes say that we can't assume that this person, because they're poor, wasn't responsible for their actions, or you see that all the time, where people say, no, you can't hold them responsible because they were raised in a tough home, in a tough society. Well, guess what? There's a lot of people that are raised in tough societies, in tough homes, in tough communities, that don't commit crimes. So you're going to basically say that everybody who goes through a rough experience, is their expectation is for them to commit crime. And that creates a situation where, you're almost doomed, because your expectation is always going to be, well, you must be one of those people that always commits crimes. That's not a good expectation to have. Look, there's always been problems that areas that are poor were more susceptible to crime. And guess what? The Jewish community used to live in them. When we moved to this country 120 years ago and we're living on the Lower East Side, those were not pleasant places to live. Needless to say, there were some very accomplished Jewish gangsters, but nobody said that's what you're supposed to do within the community. Nobody said, well, that's okay. There was still this idea that again, even while there was some kind of maybe admiration for tough Jews, there was still a recognition that this isn't okay. That every other honest person who lived in the ghetto, in these tenements, they didn't commit crimes, and they didn't say it's okay. Their families didn't say it's okay to commit crimes. So a fraction of them turned out to be some really, really tough, wicked, in some cases, very deviant people. But you know what? Most of the people didn't. So it is something to think about. What is our expectation as a society for people who are poor? There always are going to be poor people. This is the other kind of recognition of the Torah, is that there's always going to be people who aren't succeeding economically. How do we view them? How do we see them? So that's another thing to think about, again, especially now. And now we get to another part of this, which I think is very relevant to the current situation we're in. Do not deal basely with your countrymen. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow. I am the Lord. Well, this is definitely something that we can think about today. We would I mean, how do you not think about our current pandemic right now when we think about profiting by the blood of our fellow? Because again, people are taking advantage of the situation and charging a fortune for masks, or charging exorbitant prices. And again, we know that we have laws now to protect price gouging, but it's still being done. It's being done on a massive level in some cases, and it's again from the Torah standpoint, this is again ani Adonai, repeated over and over again. It's not because you want to do it. It's not because it's going to help people out. It's because God said it. And again, as Ronnie said, this is God talking. This isn't Moses or Aaron or your dad telling you to, or your mom what to do. This is God telling you what to do. So again, as Scott just pointed out, that these laws really make us think about our current situation. This one really speaks to me because we can see it happening on a daily basis on what people are charging for toilet paper or hand sanitizer. People are taking advantage of the situation, and they're profiting off the blood of our fellows. People are taking advantage of death and illness to make extra money. It is ancient and timeless. And I think as long as we have a society and a commercial system where people are going to have a profit motive, you're going to have people who are going to take advantage of it. And this is some of the worst behavior we can see in business when what are the rails that keep people from going and taking advantage of people? The Torah is one of those rails that stops people, makes people think twice before they do this. Anybody have any comments or questions or reflections on this right now? Yeah. Yeah, there were people who died because they couldn't get the proper equipment. So this isn't theoretical, and it's not something that was written 3,000 years ago. It's something that was violated it was violated today. So there might be some other things that we see coming up that are also hyper relevant, but those last couple, yeah. So you shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. Now, this is another place where if we were in a different time and a different frame of mind, we could definitely spend the whole time talking about this law, or connected laws, these two phrases, these two sentences. Not to hate somebody, not to bear a grudge. And it's further elucidated in the next line, which is the more famous line, but the lines are clearly connected. As we read, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your kinsman or against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord. So that's the part that we all know. We all know that line. This is, again, one of the most famous lines in the whole Torah. Ve'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, which again then finishes with Ani Adonai, I am the Lord. But those words, Ve'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. So we call that the Torah's at least version of the golden rule. That's the golden rule as we have it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So it's given in different ways in different places, in different sources, in different traditions, in different religions. This is the way we have it. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. And we can talk about why it's given the way it's given here. But before we even get to that, or I guess part of that, is look at the context of this. The context of this is not necessarily just as you would think about loving other people. Or again, establishing a golden rule. It's in the context of the way you think about other people, and that it goes with these other laws, which have to do with the way you feel and the way you treat other people. And it's not, I want to point out, I mean, I think you all see this, it's not just about feeling good about people and loving them, and we're all loving each other, and all you need is love. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and it's a little deeper than that.
Can I say something?
Yep, please.
Putting it in this context, you can reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt. It makes us responsible for each other. It's giving us a complicated message. I love my kids, and if I see them doing something wrong, I'm going to correct them. That's love. But I'm not going to hold a grudge against them and be angry at them for the rest of my life. And that's what love is. And that's how we're supposed to love strangers as well. If we see something wrong, we have a responsibility for attempting to correct it and to correct the person who's doing the wrong, but to do it in such a way that isn't hateful. That's in a loving way.
Yeah, well, you said it beautifully.
How does the word forgiveness come into this? We don't hold a grudge. We forgive those who have done to us or our children.
Well, hold it a second. That's an interesting point. Keep that in mind, Hal, because it doesn't actually use the word forgiveness here.
Right. That's my
It
question.
doesn't say that. So it's talking maybe along a slightly different line, but I want everybody just again to just meditate, think about what Ronnie just said, because this is what I wanted to kind of say. This is not all about everybody having a big love-in.
It's not kumbaya.
No, it's exactly, again, I like the way Ronnie said it, about responsibility for each other, and also feeling, again, the ability to let people know when they've done something wrong, that part of being a loving person is to also let the person know when you're not meeting their meeting the expectations, and when you feel that there's something that's wrong. So this allows for a real loving relationship, and not one of just people saying, I'm okay with that person.
Yeah,
but
this
you
is
really love them.
This is Kelly, because I know it's interesting because this keeps kind of coming into my mind when I go to the grocery store with everything going on. And even those grocery stores will have a big thing on the front door saying everybody must wear a mask. There are people in there without masks, and the employees are afraid to say anything or correct anything because it causes contention and almost violence.
Oh,
No, it's
somebody got killed
Shot.
yesterday in Michigan. Somebody got shot and
Yes.
killed yesterday.
So,
in Michigan.
that's why it's just, I mean, because it's something coming from people that, hey, I'm wearing my mask to protect you right now, and you're just walking around here not protecting anybody. And I don't know, it's just so, you have this kinsman of everybody should be working together, and it's causing so much strife right now.
Well, there you go. So I said that maybe we got through the relationship to our current time, but you're absolutely right. This is definitely something we are thinking about now. You're right. You're right, Kelly. This is, again, maybe the way we look at it, from that standpoint, 100%, that this is definitely relevant to us today. Look, we've had classes.
And that really brings up, again, the word forgiveness.
What?
That really brings up the word forgiveness. Again, what do we forgive? We understand that people won't wear masks, we forgive them for it. They may struggle with it. But are they harming us?
Well, wait a second. So wait, step back for a second.
Do we forgive to our detriment? Do we allow our detriment. Isn't that the same as forgiveness?
Well, if it did say forgiveness, which it doesn't.
No, but I'm just asking. It could be that forgiveness is included in this. Yes.
Yeah, but maybe that's how we get. Maybe that's how we get to forgiveness. But we have to have there has to be an accountability. So one can make the argument we don't even get to forgiveness yet at this stage because maybe the goal is again to have that kind of forgiveness or to accept people, but you can't forgive somebody. You can't forgive somebody if you haven't outlined to them what they've done wrong, and we're at a stage where maybe the person doesn't even know that you're bearing a grudge against them. So what it basically does first is saying, hey, look, there are definitely cases, Hal, where we have a grudge against somebody and then eventually we forgive them and they never even know that you were mad at them. So that does happen. I mean, that happens all the time. And then you get over it and you forgive them. But there's also this understanding here to some extent that maybe it'll be easier to forgive them, and maybe you really can't forgive them and completely forgive them until you've actually until there's actually been an accounting where you've actually held them accountable and said, hey, look, you let me down or you made a mistake. If they don't know it, first of all, how can they even ask for your forgiveness? And you're basically walking around with this all the time. So there is this element of making sure that the other person knows that they're in the wrong. There is something that they've got to be accountable for. So it is telling us that society would be a lot better off if people would deal with their stuff. So look, if you can't tell somebody to put on a mask, then first of all, how can you even forgive them for putting on the mask? Because you never even told them that they were doing something wrong in the first place. The fact that you didn't like them, they don't know that. I mean, you could give them a dirty look, but they wouldn't. They don't. Or first of all, how would you even know that you're wearing a mask? So unless you can really convey it with your eyes, they may not even know. So I would definitely recommend. Look, we're in a difficult situation here, folks, because we generally don't know our neighbors that well. So the people that we're walking through a store with today, we may never see them again. And there was a time when the people we saw in the stores were our next door neighbors, were the people that we lived with, generally speaking, all the time. So I will tell you there is a problem in that our society, our communities, our neighbors and the people we interact with, the re'echa, our neighbors or peers, are not necessarily people that we know very well. So you can make the argument that it doesn't apply to people who you see in the market because they're not really your re'echa. They're not your fellow. Who are the fellow? The people that you interact with, that you already have a relationship with. So to expect a complete stranger to react to your admonishment, it's probably not going to go over well. Or if by the way, that doesn't mean you shouldn't say anything. I'm just saying, I don't know that this really falls under the rubric of your re'echa, your kinsfolk. So you can make the argument that this really applies to people that you know already, you have a relationship with, and that they have some kind of accountability to you. Now, you're absolutely right, Kelly. Everybody around you today, we know a lot more about bacteria. We know a lot of viruses. We know about the power that people have in the space around them, which, by the way, the Torah, the Talmud does tell us we're supposed to give people 4 amot. We're supposed to give them 6 feet. That's considered your personal space, by the way. The Talmud tells us that. So the Talmud actually gives us 4 cubits as a required personal space. But they don't know that. We don't assume that those people know it. But again, Kelly gets to the point that people today oftentimes don't see themselves as part of a community. They don't see themselves as having an obligation for somebody else. Where you're saying, I'm wearing the mask for you, you wear the mask for me. Which, by the way, I know Kelly knows that Howard Stern said that today on the radio, so that's why I know that she heard that. But
Yes.
so I know that you heard that, and I heard it too. So he's been very adamant about it. He's getting more and more biblical and Jewish as he gets older. But he was literally like preaching out of the Torah today about our responsibility for our kinsmen, for the people in our community, that people need to wake up to the fact that this is proving to us how important it is for us to be responsible for each other. And I said last week, the reality is that we're really responsible for everybody in the world, because if somebody who eats a bat in China can get the whole world sick, then if you need any more indication that we're all responsible for each other, then you didn't pay attention to what happened in the last few months to our world. So I want to put out there that on one hand, how would it even play out in our world if you confronted somebody, but that we have an obligation as in our tradition as Jews, and I would say we have an obligation as Americans, because we do have a sense that we are a country, that we're a nation that's bound together by rules and by a covenant called the Constitution or our founding documents, that we do have a responsibility. Then we can say to people, you're another person in my community, even though I don't know you. We have an obligation, we have a responsibility for each other. I want you to stay healthy, and I would hope you'd want me to stay healthy. And again, to say it in the way that I'm wearing a mask for you, I'd like you to wear a mask for me. And the point that was made today on the radio by a doctor was that the way we got people to stop smoking in this country was not telling them, you got to stop smoking because it's bad for you. Because we did that for 30 years and it didn't work. But when we finally told people over and over again, your secondhand smoke is killing other people, we were able to change laws and we were able to change behavior in this country by not making it an issue for your own personal health. Because clearly people didn't care about their personal health. But when we phrase it in the point that you have an obligation to your neighbor to not get them sick, that's how we stopped it. So that was made today. And I will tell you it's very relevant because we're talking about it right now. And we're talking about it to the big law, love your neighbor as yourself. Now here's the critical thing. If we simply said, love your neighbor as yourself, and we just said, I am going to smoke because I don't care about my own health. I don't care. It's my choice and I can do whatever I want. But if we understand that when we're also treating ourselves, we need to think about what it would mean to somebody else, that really changes our responsibility to ourselves into one that also is to the wider community, that it's not simply just about ourselves. It's almost a reversal of the idea that if we simply said, love your neighbor, this would be, it'd be a nice law, but it wouldn't be as comprehensive as then adding ourselves to, or love yourself. But we understand that there's a partnership in that understanding, that there's an understanding that even if we don't care for ourselves, we got to care for other people, and vice versa, that people have to care about us too. So even in our laws that are, maybe you could say, about our own personal selves, there's a communal responsibility even in that we're a part of a greater society. So I really think that this is an interesting law. Now, again, it's phrased here within reproving people and within not bearing a grudge. But if we look at this law of loving your neighbor as yourself, it's interesting that this law is part of all the other laws. I will tell you, people get confused, and it's very easy to be confused because we have another version of the golden rule, right? In Judaism, I'm not talking about, we have lots of, Confucius has a version of this. There's versions of this in other places, in other cultures in Islam. But people know there's another Jewish version of the golden rule. Who knows what it is? Somebody. It's in the Talmud. It's Rabbi Hillel.
Don't do anything to somebody that you don't want done to yourself.
Yes, what is hateful to you, don't do to others. Now, when Hillel says it, he says that is the law of the Torah. That's the way I'd summarize the Torah, and everything else is commentary and go study it. Now, he put it into a different phrase. He didn't say love your neighbor as yourself. He knew that law. He didn't say to the guy, the convert, remember, the convert says to him, if you could teach me all the Torah on standing on one foot, tell me the whole Torah. That's what he says. But he doesn't say it. He doesn't say it that way. He says, what is hateful to you, don't do to others. It's a reformulation of this law. And it's interesting because when he says it as a principle, as a unitary principle, as a one principle, it's one thing, he doesn't say it like this. He chooses to say it in a different way. Because I think to some extent he realizes that if you're just going to say that line, it really doesn't help the same way. It doesn't help guarantee society as the way he says it. Because when he says it the way he says it, he's actually telling people that if you protect other people the way you protected yourself, the world would be a better place. Now, again, it's a slippery slope and it's a difficult thing to do to try to summarize the whole Bible in one line. But that's what he was trying to do with his formulation of the golden rule, is he took it out of it, and he also took it out of the context of love. He actually flipped it. What is hateful, don't do. Because what we do in loving ourselves sometimes is not probably the best idea, or at least the best idea for society to be. But when you put it into the negative form, then maybe that is more protective of society than the way the Torah has it. So his way is a little bit more protective. Yeah.
Something else that jumps out at me, comparing the Jewish sensibility with modern secular American sensibility. We spend a lot of time talking about rights. We don't talk about rights as Jews. We talk about obligations and responsibilities as Jews.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we don't have rights, but it puts the emphasis in a different place.
Yes, which is why another thing that came out in today's discussion on the radio was by Jewish standards by Jewish law and Jewish approach to law, you're right. The emphasis is on the community, and so Jewish law would not really have an issue with contact tracing. American law might. American laws, we're going to see. And again, one of the reasons why we haven't done it at all yet, and why South Korea did it, is because they don't have the same rights, privacy rights that the United States has as sacred rights. So we are starting to see, Ronnie, an interesting, as our world becomes smaller and smaller, and as we see that technology changes the boundaries and moves the boundaries of individuals' rights and what is an individual today, we are starting to see these things come head to head in conflict. The idea of rights, of individual rights versus the needs and the protection of society. So we are seeing this in our country right now. This is we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. It happened after 9/11, and we had some debates, and I think we can kind of see where we're going. And again, a lot of people say, look, we've eroded civil rights, personal rights. We're going to see how this is going to play out in the coming decades. It's not going to get easier. It's going to get more and more, maybe the most divisive issue in the United States. And to some extent, we see it in so many ways. We see it in the discussions and the arguments over abortion. We see it in the laws as they play out in right to life and euthanasia. These are laws that are getting and discussions that are just becoming more and more part of our everyday discourse. And this might be what rips apart our country more than any other issue, maybe because it's an underlying issue for so many other things, is this issue of person's personal rights versus the rights of the protection of society. So we're going to see this play out. I guarantee you, this is just the beginning. Or we're not at the beginning. We've been having these discussions for 40, 50 years, but this is not the end of it. And again, 150 years ago, it was the rights of a state versus the federal rights. Now we're getting to eventually this issue of where do our civil rights and our personal space, where do those now? And we've gone kind of no longer talking about the state. We're talking about the individual. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I think, again, this might split our country apart. You see it. You see the anger and the hostility from people who believe that any type of requirements for masks or closures are a violation of people's rights. And I get it. I mean, I'm a First Amendment. I'm a big believer in the First Amendment. I'm a big believer in people's rights for themselves. But I mean, I'm assuming that the issue of vaccination, it ain't going away, because when there is a vaccine for this disease and there's people that are refusing to be vaccinated, we might see more violence. I mean, it's very possible. So the Torah doesn't deal with necessarily civil rights or individual rights, though there are, I would say, protections, right? We see that there's protections about, an individual not being taken advantage of, that an individual is supposed to be cared for, is supposed to be protected, but not necessarily be able to do anything they want to do. There's a very famous phrase in the Talmud: you're not allowed to drill a hole under your seat on the boat, right? So you're not.
I love that.
That's a famous law in the Torah. You're in the Talmud. It's not in the Torah. It's in the Talmud. You're not allowed to drill a hole under your own seat. I only drilled it under my own seat. Yeah, this is, again, as people are pointing out, these are laws that are very much should be part of our discussion and part of the way we live. Okay, so as we finish up chapter 19, we're gonna jump back into some
Sexy stuff.
Yeah, sexy talk, sexy time, as Borat says, it's sexy time. So we're gonna get into some of these laws of our personal behavior, and look again at the context. You shall observe my laws. You shall not let your cattle mate with different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed. You shall not put on cloth from a mixture of two kinds of materials, what we call shotness. That's the Hebrew word for it, shotness. And those laws are still in effect, and still nobody ever said those are over, which is why we have people in the Orthodox world who their job is to go around checking people's garments and making sure they're not mixed fabrics. Well, mixed fabrics are allowed. I don't want to say all mixed fabrics, but mixing cloth that is, one is, for example, linen, and one might be wool, right? A blend, not okay. And there are people who actually check to see that the clothing that people are wearing is okay. So shotness, that's the laws of shotness. And then again, you can see the context of this seems to be not mixing things together that are not meant to be mixed together. Some of them seem pretty obvious, and probably keep things from getting out of hand. Some of them seem maybe not as necessary, like the clothing part. But the idea of mixing seeds is something that, again, one could argue we're doing all the time now with genetic engineering. Genetic engineering would definitely be, in some cases, seen as a violation. Now, again, it's not all genetic engineering. It's not engineering or tweaking or splicing genes from the same species, the same person, if you will, the same individual, that might be okay. But splicing together genes from different types of animals, different types of species, that might be a problem. Now, again, there's people who are, I mean, we're doing this all the time now, so don't think that this is science fiction. I mean, this is happening all the time. You're eating food that's been genetically modified, unless you're only getting non-genetically modified. Unless some people are, but most of the time, if you're going out to eat at a restaurant, they're not serving non-GMO. So this is part of our lives today. Now, a lot of people say that these laws are to protect us and to make sure that we never create Frankenstein type, which is not really Frankenstein, because again, those were different people. You can maybe say that's okay, but a Frankenstein with other creatures being put together into that person, that maybe that this is prohibiting that type of genetic engineering. And again, there are people who say that this could literally wind up causing a pandemic or some type of virus or bacteria or organism that would be super destructive. That would be able to not, and again, that's why people are wondering whether this virus was created, because we know we could do it. It's not a question of could we do it? We could do it. Did we do it? Did whoever did? I don't want to get into and say it was done, but there are people who are saying it was done because it could be done. We know it could be done. So this is very scary for us, because this could be the way that we wipe out humanity. We could wipe out humanity by creating a strain of virus or a strain of some type of animal, or animal that ended up spreading the virus. We know we could do this, and it's a scary thing to have that power, and to know that we could actually do this is very scary. And in my mind, like, somehow I wonder whether our ancestors knew that this is a possibility, that one day we could do this. I mean, again, if God gave us this message thousands of years ago, maybe there's a reason for it. And maybe there was, a warning encapsulated in this even before we knew how to do this on a big level. And they knew how to do genetic engineering back then. We know it. We read about it in the Torah. The story of Jacob. We're going to read next week about how Jacob, the Midrash, how Jacob, we'll read in the Torah too, how Jacob genetically modified or used his knowledge of genetics to create a strain of goats that he could take with him. They knew about genetics back then. I mean, they didn't know that there was a gene, but they did know that there were recessive genes. They did know that they could mate animals together. They did know that they could breed a donkey. So they knew about this kind of stuff. And so maybe our ancestors were prophetic. Maybe, again, God gave us a message for our day and for the future, that this could be the thing that destroys you. So it's a very important cautionary lesson here that's, again, in the Holiness Code, and it look at the context for it. It's not, it might be there for a reason. Now, we get into this law. If a man has carnal relations with a woman who is a slave and has been designated for another man, but has not been redeemed or given her freedom, there shall be an indemnity. They shall not, however, be put to death, since she has not been freed. Okay, so that's a law of a woman who's not technically a free woman. She's technically a slave. But he must bring to the entrance of the tent of meeting as a guilt offering to the Lord a ram of guilt offering. With the ram of guilt offering, the priest shall make expiation for him before the Lord for the sin that he committed, and the sin that he committed will be forgiven him. this is, again, not the main law that we want to talk about as far as sex, but it does give us a little guide, a little guidance of what the Torah is considered, what they're concerned about, which is, again, procreation or the misappropriation of the act of procreation, which would then, again, create a situation where women were being used for sex, but not treated fairly and not being treated as a wife. When you enter the land and plant any tree for food, you shall regard its fruit as forbidden. 3 years it shall be forbidden for you, it shall not be eaten. In the fourth law, all its fruit shall be set aside for jubilation before the Lord. So for 3 years you let a tree grow, and in the fourth year you set aside its fruit for the priests. Only in the fifth year may you use its fruits, that its yield to you may be increased. I am the Lord your God. So this law of what we call orlah allows for, and the word orlah comes from here, this fruit that is set aside. This law allows for trees to grow, not to be stressed, and we know this from horticulture today, that this is a way to keep trees from being stressed. It allows them to grow and to be healthier trees if you leave them alone for the first few years. Right, Harvey? Harvey. Is this true, Harvey?
Totally agree.
What?
I agree. My fruit trees, let them go.
Harvey, how long do you let your fruit trees grow for, usually?
It's been about 3 or 4 years before they started getting fruit.
Yep. There you go. Harvey knows. Harvey knows. Any other mini farmers out there?
Not like me in my neighborhood.
Well,
I have my garden. I got my veggies.
yeah.
I got my fruit. I have my citrus.
Yep. And from what I understand, Harvey's trees are growing healthy. So listen to him when he tells you the laws of the Torah. Now, again, are these laws for everybody everywhere? Maybe not. Maybe these are laws that the laws of the land of Israel in particular. But again, it's probably common sense to any tree that you shall, again, leave it alone. Let it grow. Let it become.
We have to develop a toilet paper tree. Got one of those, Harvey?
Not yet.
Well, that's, again, the reason that we have Tu B'Shvat, the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, is so that law can go into effect. So the reason that the rabbis instituted the date of the 15th of Shvat was so they would know when the tree was planted, so that they could allow it to have those 4 years of again, allowing it to grow. And again, it's a great lesson. The rabbis compared it to a child. You don't try to stress a child when it's young. Don't make it do too many things. Don't stress it out. Don't make it, don't try to have it play the piano at necessarily 2 years old, or play golf.
Except if they're Chinese.
If they're, oh my gosh, I can't believe Phyllis just said that. Where's Ronnie? Ronnie.
He's not here to shut me up.
Well, there were Jewish parents that stressed their kids out too. But yes, you could say also Tiger Woods' dad was not a great exemplar of letting your kid alone and letting the kid grow up. But yeah, we kind of take that lesson hopefully for our children too. You shall not eat anything that is blood. As you can see, we're not even going to finish this chapter because there's so much in this chapter. Again, not eating things with blood. We talked about this before a little bit when we talked about kashrut. Here's the flat out law. Don't have anything with blood in it. And then it goes into, you shall not practice divination or soothsaying. There seems to be an understanding that like maybe these things are connected too, that maybe the use of blood in rituals and in eating was kind of used as, the blood would be used for witchcraft. So either you use it for, we saw how it's used in the priesthood, how they sprinkle blood on the altar and use it for those powers, that maybe people used it in other powers too. Well, we know they did. I mean, it's not speculation. We know that in the ancient world, they used blood for witchcraft, and they used it for, eye of newt and blood of whatever. They used that stuff for witchcraft. So maybe, again, not eating it was also not having that Now, you shall not round off the side growth of your head or destroy the side growth of your beard. So this is the law of peah again, but on your head. And so the rabbis point out that here in the same chapter, we actually have the law of peyot, because you leave your hair corners alone, and so you don't cut them. Now, again, do you have to let them grow long? Well, that's why some Orthodox Jews take that law strictly, or again, some say it just means you just don't cut them off. You let them grow, but you don't have to let them continuously grow, but that's why some Orthodox Jews have beards and some don't, and some believe that you don't have to have payas. There's a lot of Orthodox Jews, religious, observant Jews, that don't believe that the law has to do anything other than the pagan practice of basically creating a mohawk where people's heads of their sides of their heads were shaved all the way on the sides, and that was considered a pagan practice. Because again, it seems as though these are, you shall not make gashes in your flesh for the dead, or incise any marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. Do not degrade your, before we even get to that, because it does seem to be connected with the next line, which is about following the practices of the Canaanites, of the people that lived there in the land before you did, or had control of the land before you did. The Canaanites did these kinds of things. So this is the law. This is where we have the law against tattooing. So if you want to know where does the law come from, it's this law from Leviticus chapter 19. So you just see this right here. This is the law. Don't make gashes on your flesh. Now, some people say that the tattooing had to do specifically with the tattooing was the gashes for the dead. That tattoos and gashes were done for people who died. And we know that there are cultures that do that. There are African cultures that do skin marks, either brands or kind of like scars or tattoos under their eyes to represent tears. There's a lot, that's actually a fairly common thing too in the Hispanic community, of tattooing a tear, that these were ways of showing memorial, that these were ways that people expressed their love for people by doing these things. So is the tattoo law specifically about the dead? Some people have interpreted it that way, that a tattoo would be okay as long as it wasn't for the dead. It's a very liberal interpretation, but it is an interpretation that we have. Some people have gone even further. And by the way, my job today is not to give liberal interpretations for tattoos, but I have already gone down this road now with you, that perhaps incising the marks on yourselves was specifically about the word, not putting the word Ani Adonai on your body. You're not supposed to incise on yourself the words Ani Adonai. I don't think that's the intention of it. So some people have interpreted it, as long as you don't put the words I'm God on yourselves, then you're okay. I don't think that's the intention. Because if you noticed, it said Ani Adonai over and over and over again. It's not just in this line. It's a repetitive line in the Holiness Code, Ani Adonai. But some people have interpreted it as saying, as long as you don't tattoo the words I'm God on yourself, that's okay too. Seems to be a pretty liberal way of reading it, one that allows for people to have a tattoo and not feel guilty about it. Again, in the context of things that we're doing, some people would say it's no different than rounding off the side growth of your head. And so is it more prohibited than another thing? I don't know. I only can tell you that my daughters get no money at all if they get a tattoo. So I don't mean not ever. I'm just saying they don't, while they are under my protection and under my dollars, they knew the rule was no tattoos. One of my daughters, I knew it would never be an issue. One of them, I'm still not so sure of. But the point is that
and she's not going to let you check.
Well, I'll only tell you that I can't tell them what to do as far as for their whole lives. They know that the interesting thing, and I've talked to young people about this a lot, tattoos are popular now. There's no question it's a popular thing, but it used to not be a popular thing. And who knows, it may not be a popular thing again. My guess is that it's going to fall out of style again, that because it's a trend and trends come in and out. And as I told people before, I don't have any issue with trends. I'm not really a great, as people know, I don't ever dress with any kind of trend at all. But, you know, as people will laugh at me because I could wear the same thing every day. But what I tell people is this: anything that's a trend, it's okay. Trends are meant to come and go. Fashion styles come and go. The issue is that if you get a tattoo, you can't make it come and go. You can get it removed, but now you've just had a scar put on your body. So my issue is only, and I tell kids this all the time, you look at your parents and look at the way their hair looked 30 years ago. Look at their yearbook picture. Would you like their hair to still look like that? So the point is that why make yourself look a certain way for the rest of your life? The great thing about not having tattoos and being able to wear different clothes and being able to wear different types of hairstyles is because you can come and go. Now, I will tell you that what I did for myself in our own family is we actually went another step. None of our daughters were allowed to get their ears pierced until they were off the dole. So they that was one of the ways that we kept the tattoo discussion one level away, because we didn't even let them get their ears pierced. Tracy didn't get her ears pierced until last year. She had her ears pierced for her 50th birthday, which also made it a little bit easier. But now I think now they probably will get their ears pierced. And actually Rachel did just get her ears pierced. She got her ears pierced for her 21st birthday. So again, our kind of rule was, or our logic behind the rule was that we created a fence around that rule. So we figured if this was going to be our rule, then we're going to put a fence a little further out. And that's what the concept of that we have in Judaism of putting a fence around the Torah. We create a law that protects us from violating the other law. So that's kind of what we did. And nowhere in the Torah, by the way, does it say that you can't have your ears pierced. So even though it says right here, you're not supposed to incise any marks on yourselves, clearly ear piercing was okay, because several places in the Torah, it says that women and men had their ears, had piercings.
Okay, Mark, Rabbi, I think you need to get your ears pierced.
That will not happen. Guys, I don't even wear a ring. I don't even wear a wedding ring. I can't stand jewelry. I just don't like it. I can't. The only Apple, I love Apple stuff. The only Apple thing I've never gotten was a watch, because I love it. I love the watch. It's got so many cool things on it. I'll never get it because I don't like wearing jewelry.
You get your ears pierced and I'll buy you a diamond stud.
Yeah, thanks. I would never have my ears pierced. I will tell you that when I was in college, though, we had a discussion. I had a discussion with some people in college that I actually considered getting a Holocaust survivors numbers tattooed on my arm. And I did, and other people have done it. I mean, very famous case of it is David Blaine has Primo Levi, the author's numbers tattooed on him. I thought about it as a testament so that people would know that after people died who had tattoos, that people would see it and ask a question and know that this was, that I was preserving that. And most of the survivors I talked to about it said, don't do it. They said, you should never do it because we didn't want to have it done to us. And it's a violation of the Torah. And as much as it's going to keep that legacy going, it's not a legacy that people should have. So it was the only time that I ever thought about it. And I thought about it. And again, people have done it. There are other people who've done it. I know people, there's a guy I know in Israel, our tour guide, who had his grandfather's numbers tattooed. Maybe if it was my grandfather or father, or maybe I would have done it. Maybe that would have put me over. But again, the survivors I talked to said, don't do it. Don't.
Your heart was in the right place.
Yeah, it was something I seriously, I really thought about. And this was, before tattoos got so popular. But yeah, I'm glad I didn't. And I thought it was an important way to remind people for the future, because as we lose those people, you'll see it. I mean, you'll see it in movies, but somehow seeing it on a person is, I mean, most people know that when you've seen that tattoo on somebody, just for us, no matter what, it takes your breath away for a second, because you realize that those people have carried that number with them for the rest of their lives.
Mark, this Torah portion has some relevance to the Holocaust, correct? There's some reference to the Holocaust, the word Kedoshim.
In what way? What was, obviously you were part of a discussion, so I was.
No, I was glancing at something, and it said regarding the 6 million Jews as that they're holy souls, which has to do with holiness. Have you read that? Have you heard that?
Well, we use the same word. We do use the same word for people who've. We call the people who died in the Holocaust, we call them Kedoshim. It's one of our ways of referring to the victims of the Holocaust. It means the holy ones. So it's another way of saying, it's like not saying martyr, but it's a different word. Because we call somebody who died, we call it for Kiddush Hashem, for the sanctification of God's name, for the holiness of God's name. So there is a tradition of calling the people just flat out Kedoshim, rather than calling them victims or trying to think of what else we call them, the murdered, but we don't really call them the murdered. We call them martyrs oftentimes. We call them martyrs, but Kedoshim is kind of a euphemism in a way, because it doesn't talk about them dying. It talks about them being holy.
Holy.
So yes, we do call the victims Kedoshim. We don't call the survivors Kedoshim. We call the 6 million murdered Kedoshim. So yeah.
We say that for all victims, or is that only pertaining to the Holocaust? I used to.
We didn't. It's an interesting thing. So when we had pogroms and other things like the Inquisition, we didn't call them Kedoshim. We called it Kiddush Hashem, but to talk about one group of people as Kedoshim, we didn't really call them that. It was never used until the Holocaust. But we did use the word Kiddush Hashem. We talked about people who died. But for so many people who died in such a short period of time, there needed to be some kind of word for that. So it follows that kind of, again, that Kiddush Hashem. So let's read a little bit more, because, we're not going to get to the end of, we're close, but we're not going to get to the end. It's okay. We don't have to get to the end of the portion. The next line is, you shall not degrade your daughter and make her a harlot, lest the land fall into harlotry and the land be filled with depravity. So again, this is this idea, which seems pretty straightforward, that you don't want to be like the Canaanites. You don't want to have that kind of thing, which again, clearly that means that the Canaanites did have their daughters as harlots, that it was not an issue for them. And that it was considered to be maybe for temple cultic prostitution, but even more so, this uses the word znotah, which is not necessarily cultic prostitution. A zonah is usually a harlot, which is why they translate it as a harlot rather than a cultic prostitute, which is got the word kadosh in it for the person who's for the harlot, for the temple prostitute in the pagan world. This is again more of a harlot. So Judaism didn't encourage, hardly, as you can see, people becoming prostitutes. It is frowned upon in modern day Israel, and it is interesting that most of the prostitutes that are in Israel right now that are working are brought in from overseas. Israelis it's a very strange thing. They almost have a reaction to having a prostitute be another Jew and being an Israeli citizen. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. 100% it does. But most of the prostitutes that have been brought into Israel, that are working in Israel today, are there from Eastern Europe. They're there from Russia, Belarus, especially Ukraine and Moldova. Those countries, Ukraine and Moldova, have there's a huge amount of them. Oftentimes they were not Jewish. They were brought in illegally. They were human trafficked. Israel has really cracked down on it over the last few years, and they've done a great job of going from a country that was very, very lax in its prosecution to being very forceful on their books. It's very interesting. In Israel, prostitution is not illegal. It's very hard to find. It's not open. There's not streetwalkers or red light districts, but it is illegal to pimp. It's illegal to run women as prostitutes. So the men, or usually men, but it could also be women who run prostitution, they can be prosecuted and they'll go to jail if they get caught. But women will not usually get caught or prosecuted. So it kind of, Israeli law actually protects the women as much as possible and makes it so that, again, technically speaking, they're not violating the law, but it does encourage them to come forward and let the authorities know that if they are in a situation where they're being forced into prostitution. So it's not a, this has been going on in Israel since Israel's founding, but it is an interesting thing that in Israel today, that it is, it's very much a imported business, if you will. With that beautiful note, get something better. Here, how about this one? Keep my Sabbaths and venerate my sanctuary. I am the Lord. That's a nice one.
Nice.
Keep Shabbat. Let's leave on that. Keep Shabbat and make the mikdash, make the tabernacle, and again, eventually the temple holy. But we hope you join us on Shabbat for
Shall we
Shabbat.
count, Rabbi? Should we count the Omer real quick?
Yeah, by the way, we also did something late because I never got this up on Facebook, which is the first time so far I didn't do it. But we did not offer the blessing, which is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, la'asok b'divrei Torah. We thank you, God, for the mitzvah of studying the Torah. And tonight, we also want to say tonight that as we get into the 28th day of the Omer, we count these days. And I will point out, we sent out an email about Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of Omer, which is next Monday. So next week from tonight, if you do the math, it'll be the 35th day. Go back 2 days. Monday night is my wife's birthday, but it's also Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. As I mentioned before, hopefully by the time we're done, we'll be back out and having more freedoms. It looks like we will. We won't maybe have all of our freedom and abilities to do everything, but we are counting down these days, very much like a prisoner counting down the days. But tonight, as we count down the Omer, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, al sfirat haomer. We thank you, God, for the mitzvah of counting down the Omer. Today, Hayom Shmona V'Esrim Yom Shehem Arba Shavuot LaOmer. That tonight is the 28th day of the Omer, and we have 4 weeks, exactly 4 weeks of the Omer. So we've done it for 4 weeks. We've been counting down, and we have, again, we're getting close. We've got about 22 days more until we have Shavuot. So in about 3 weeks, a little over 3 weeks, we'll have Shavuot. We are working with Best Shalom at doing our online Shavuot service. And so at the end of the weeks, at the end of the 7 weeks, we're going to have the Shavuot service. And so we're working on that. Technically speaking, it's their week. It's their year to host. So we're going to have them, they're going to host it, and we're going to have them host, and but it'll be their Zoom account or whatever, but we'll all be together for a Shavuot. So again, take care, everybody.
Hey, Mark, one second, may I just shift gears and ask you something?
Sure.
So a friend of mine just sent me a blessing for the mitzvah of putting on a mask, which is, I guess, meant to be a little comical. But can I read the 4 lines in Hebrew too?
Sure, please.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al shtimarat hanefesh. Blessed are you, eternal our God, sovereign of the world, who has sanctified us with commandments and commanded us to protect life.
Yeah, well, that's not a joke. That's actually somebody took that
Hmm.
pretty seriously, which is how do we say a blessing over how do we do a blessing over putting on a mask? Well, let's not look at it as we're putting on a mask. Let's look at it as we're protecting life, which again, which I think is a really nice idea and definitely gets to Hal. Thank you for what we talked about tonight, which is we don't wear a mask because
Beautiful.
we're protecting ourselves. We're protecting other people. That we're doing it to think about other people. So again, thank you everybody for being here. And
Thank you, Mark.
it's nice to see you without masks, by the way. All right, everybody, stay safe.
See you
Good
Friday.
night.
Thank
See
you.
Friday. All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Leave the meeting.
Bye. Leave the meeting. All right, we're getting out.